Alright, so at this point, what I'm doing and thinking about is looking at it and evaluating how I can get this to look better. And so far we've done some things that have really helped, but this still needs some work. First thing I'll take a look at is the black and white, and I'll bring up my my ideas that I had at the beginning here and see that most of this stuff has been addressed. So get rid of that, and I can start a new one now. So again, I'm evaluating, sitting back, and I'm evaluating where else how I can make this better. And most of the time it's going to be about pushing and pulling again, cutting things out or pushing things back. For instance, right here, this guy is way too dark for the distance that I wanted at. So I didn't catch that earlier, but this guy needs to be pushed back. I feel like this further dome could be pushed back a little bit into space and help with the depth there to separate these two guys. You see the black levels, if I turn this off, and I'm looking at the black levels up here are darker than what we see down here, and this is supposed to be closer than this guy. Maybe it's about the atmosphere, but I just don't like how that's standing out, and we don't want to create high contrasts in areas that are not our focal areas. So this really dark contrast against that lighter sky messes with our eye a little bit and doesn't keep the image clean. What we want to do is group and organize our values in a general area. So anything in this shadow area is going to be of a general tone in value, general value, sorry, and we get to group the values together. So this section of values will be grouped, and that way our eye and our brain has an easier time digesting it. And what it helps do is create a harmony within your piece without, you know, if you created tons of different contrasts everywhere, it would just look really noisy, and the eye doesn't know where to look. But if we group our values together in major sections, then we create a harmony throughout the painting. So we're going to push this back further and kind of group it in there. This guy too. And this is what I'm talking about, and this is the kind of stuff that you're not going to get from CG. You know, you can be the best model in the world and the best 3D guy, and I've seen it, is that they just don't have a good eye or the fundamentals to make an image look pleasing. They'll model the shit out of something and it'll look amazing, and they'll spend all this time doing it, but when they put it together in the scene, it just doesn't look right because they don't have an understanding of image composition, value, color, atmosphere, edges, contrasts, and things like that or create strong focal areas to make the image successful. So those are the things I'm going to be concentrating more on, and I think is valued more to me. That cursed message is valued more to me in the way I work. And that's why you see a lot of this slop and mess, is because I don't want to spend time in 3D. I'd rather come into Photoshop and use what I know as far as value, color, form, composition, atmosphere, and things like that to create a strong focal area and a strong image. So along those lines, we've pointed out these areas here. At the same time, I think there's a bit of a jump between here and here. It's just too much contrast between the two. So maybe, you know, we can create some separation between this guy here and group these together somehow. Either, and it's probably going to be pushing these values, these black values, down and grouping them similar to, not similar, but closer to. So there isn't such a big jump where we create such a harsh contrast, or else our eye is going to go straight here. Whereas we want our eye to come here and then kind of go through the composition. So maybe soften out some of these areas. The black levels are just too high, and maybe create some separation, again knocking that tree back, cutting him out, but also knocking this guy back as well. Taking a look at some other things, I think we can use some lights here to create more visual interest in this area. We'll paint a lot more lights later on as well, everywhere really, but we want to create a nice focal area here, so maybe have a bunch of lights here. We want our eye to be drawn there, and there'll be lights here as well, but let's see where else. So right now I can see that this is a little too CG for me. It's really, and that's the thing, is when you model for things that are further in the background, as soon as they start getting bigger and closer, we start seeing and feeling a little too CG. So that's a little too primitive CG looking for me. I may replace that. This guy too, I may end up replacing this, putting a little bit more of a photographic look to it to hold this area down. I may choose to do this one as well. Let's see, where else? We're missing some cleanup texture here. Clean that up. Also, I'm not a big fan of this thing right here. It was sloppy work, so we're going to replace that with some nice relief, kind of like what we did here in the photographic texture area. We'll use a similar relief on this one, and then paint this guy out and clean it up. That way there's a difference between the three, between the other two, and it creates a feature here and cleans up a lot of the slop that we had. Alright, so that's what I can see for now. Obviously we're going to add a lot more lights and stuff, interest in here as well. So that's also coming, and maybe some more people in some of these boats. Create some lights to create life and a little bit more visual interest. We don't want to get too distracting, so maybe keep our detail right around this area so that it pushes you up to our focal area, so we can create a strong little thing there. And maybe we'll add some lights here and there to create, you know, some interest. Alright, so let's jump into it. Alright, so along the lines of creating that strong focal area, I noticed that the stairs here looking really flat, not much interactive light going on for the intensity of those things. So all I did was literally took the line tool, and this is the reason why we paint at such a high res too, is because when we scale it down we can get away with this right here. So there's a little bit of color in there, so I'll just sample it. We don't want it that thick, so let's set a 1 pixel. It just needs a little bit of top light and some light interaction here, and this will create a nice contrast for our eye to follow. So I'm literally doing that, and then I'll go into a clipping mask there, and because there's no light in the middle, I'm just gonna paint that out just a little bit, just to break it up so we don't have, you know, straight lines going all the way across. And then what you could do is you can either get your dodge tool and dodge it like this to create that light reflection. But what I like to do instead is create a layer, clip it on, and the shortcut, the hotkey is Control-Alt-G on the keyboard there. And then I'll take my soft brush and I'll sample just a light color off of that and come in here and I'll paint on it, and that way I can control it. So if I zoom out and I feel like that's way too strong, I can come back and pull it down. Adds a little bit more of a visual interest in that area. That's all. If we take a look at, let me just rename it. I like to stay clean as much as possible. Stairs paint. If you take a look at the before and the after, you'll see how much that little bit just really helps to create some interest, form, and lighting over there, integration. And that's all it took, is just noticing those kinds of things and then adding a little bit here and there to pick it up. I mean, the same thing we can do, you know, small stuff like grabbing that guy there, and just for form's sake, you know, we can pick up just a little bit of that edge and then we can erase it up. Cast that shadow, but what it does is it just adds a little bit more form so that our eye can say, okay, that's going further down a little bit and won't get lost. Just small things like that. But that's, you know, that could be a final thing too. We don't need to do that right now, but while I was doing it, I decided to do it. Alright, let's throw on some haze. So there's a layer for the haze that we talked about, knocking this guy back. Let's take a look at how that happened. The same way we've been doing it is grabbing that Z depth again and grading it until I have a nice value for this guy. We're looking at just this guy over here. Now I could grade this even more by grabbing this down and pulling this up. We can grade it even more, basically saying only affect that area. And because our alpha is cut out, we're not worried about this white, because at the top of our stack we have the alpha of our entire image, which is grouped at the top. So that's why I can get away with that. So there that is. All I'm doing is sampling, creating a new layer. We have our Z depth. You can see how useful that Z depth pass is. We use it over and over and over again. And I'm just going to sample a dark value off of the sky. Now this is going to give me a start. Paint it in with a soft brush, and if I feel like it's coming over top of this guy a little too much, then we can go in like we just did and grade it. Grade our Z depth. Pull it down. Don't affect that, but affect that guy. And we get less on this edge. We may want a little bit just so that we have a little bit of color bleed and a little bit of softening of that edge so that there isn't such a hard contrast, but that's really how simple it is. And if we're going to take a look at our values, make sure our values are correct too. So we have that dark, and now we've shifted it back into space. Let's do the same for that guy, and it's just a matter again of grading it so that there's a separation between these guys. This element here, what's in front and what's behind, and we just take a soft brush exactly the same way and we paint it in, and you see what it's doing there, how much is affecting it. Pushing that value back, getting it closer, grouping those values together. So that's all that it took for that area that we had in our notes here. So I can take that and I'll delete it as I start hitting my notes. So here is the texture work done on this guy. And all that is, I mean, you could do multiple things. One, to get rid of this, we can create a selection and grab the clone tool. Let's do all layers and just clone it out. I'm going to do it fast so you guys aren't watching me clone. I'm sure you know how to use the clone tool by now. If that doesn't work for you, you can always sample a texture off of your plate here, and there's a, I'm not sure what the hotkey was, but it was a copy merged. We can duplicate the layer. Oops. Where was it? There it is. Duplicate, merge. There was a copy paste merge, but I forgot where it is, what the hotkey is for it. We can paste in a texture here, clip it onto where we just painted, and edit it a little bit if we need to. Or don't clip it and just grab a brush and reveal it in some places to bring that texture back. We don't need it everywhere, but just a little bit of texture helps. That's how you clean that up. And then the relief I found on CG Textures. Same right here. And pretty much just bringing it in, copy and pasting it in here, and let me get rid of these guys. Copying and paste it in, but the only difference here is, so here's the texture. I distorted it using the distortion tools. You know, if I feel like it's not in perspective, you know, I'll push it around with my distort tool. I can right click skew. I use mostly the distort tool, and I'm paying attention to where the edges of that box are that I'm putting it on. And then color correction. So here's my curves layer, just curving it down a lot to get, and I do that in my value, turn on my values, grade it so that it fits the value that this face is in, and I have a lot of reference here because of the 3D lit asset. And then I'm going to do a color pass, and it's set on color because I don't want to affect my values. So you can see the color shift, and then once I have that, this is starting to look flat. So we're always thinking about lighting as well. So when you bring in a texture and you flatten out like this, it starts to lose its form and just look like kind of distorted texture that's been placed on that plane. We want that 3D look, and the way we get it is bringing in some lighting. And what I like to do is I'll duplicate my layer. I'm sure you've seen this multiple times, and I'll just grade it. I put it on screen, and then I'm going to grade it to get a really high contrast image here. I'm not worried about the color. I'm just looking to separate out those highlights from the darks. So something like that could help. And then I'm going to desaturate this whole thing. And I'll fill it with black. I'll grab a brush and start revealing just the topmost faces that I think are going to get hit by light. And you can see a little bit of the lighting in there already. So, you know, the top facing surfaces of the elephant, where that light will pick up on that bevel. So faces that are extruding out, like these beveled edges. Like that. You can pick up a few highlights here and there. And, you know, that's all I think it's going to take, you know, to get this thing to look like it's not flat. Make sure you hit some of those edges too. Up here, you can use the line tool again to reveal, and then paint black to break it up. Whoops. Paint black to kind of break up that edge, so it's not just a straight line. Break up. Let's see, same thing on this edge here, and then you can break that up. And you guys get the point. And then you can come in here and just push it down because those values are crazy. And if you need to, you know, pick up a little bit more in there. And we can add a little bit of cyan to this just to mix in with some of the fill color. Just a little bit. Pull it down, and we have a little bit more depth than we did right there. Alright, and that's how that's done. Let's go on to our tree haze here. Knocking that back. Again, using the same things we have been, using that tree ID that we've had. I'm not sure if I opened it here. Well, I'll open it in a second. So just throwing that into mask like we have been doing, and just grabbing a brush, sampling the value behind it, and just with a soft brush coming in and just putting that together right there. Knocking it back. I want to look at the contrast. If we take a look in this area, see how dark it was before, and we're just knocking back those black values. Now it sits a little bit better in there. It's not creating a focal area. Same thing with all those guys now, and this time my mask is going to be on the buildings and not the trees. You see the trees are blacked out because we've already done the trees. Now we just want to hit the buildings. So that's on top of my group here. And then inside there, I'm using the Z-depth. Always using the Z-depth. Whenever I'm painting atmosphere, you want to use Z-depth because it's going to show up. It's not going to be a flat value again over everything. We see that in some areas, it's less than others, and that creates a little bit of the realism. Even in the people back here, you can see there's separation in there. And that's going to add the realism, and that's where the Z-depth is really powerful. So I grade it to this level just like we have been doing. Painting it in everywhere. As you can see, if I turn off that mask, it's everywhere, and then I want to strategically paint it where I want. So I paint out a little bit near the bottom there, and then that's all it takes is a subtle shift of value. Darker and a little bit lighter, grouping these a little closer together because they're starting to come less contrast, less of a jump. Now let's jump to this guy. You see the little guy here on its own ID. We load up in there. And of course the Z-depth is still the same, but now that it's controlled only by this alpha, we can paint in where we want, and it'll only reveal in that area. Same thing, lightening it up and just grouping these values now together, making a less transition for the background there. Alright, so let's keep moving on with our notes here. So we've hit that up. Just going to delete that. We've hit all these up. Just grab eraser, or just do that. Alright, let's jump into some texture work. So here we are. Replacing that texture. Let's take a look at it in color. So if I turn it on and off, you can see the difference in the realism. Much better. And all that is going into our guy here. We use some of this stuff for the texturing part as well. We can grab the whole thing or just the base. Let's grab just the face for now. And don't worry about the lighting too much because we'll knock that down. First thing I'm going to do is scale it down to see how it fits in this. So we're going to distort it into shape. Right click, I just click distort. I'm going to try to match it to my box there. I keep distorting. And because this is a rectangular shape, it's a little easier. All I'm going to do is match my points up with the perspective that's already in the plate there. So if I can't see the line, I'll move it up and see that it's right here. So I was a little off. The bottom point would be there. And let's see where the bottom point of this guy would be. Yeah, so somewhere there. And then we can readjust our perspective on this guy and on this guy. We can zoom in here and do this as well so it's a little easier to see. So I'm going to line it up to that face right there and this guy here. And let's just say I'm happy with that. I'm not going to take too much time doing it for you guys so we don't waste time. And then I'm going to start color correcting it. So I can do it separately here. Curves, and I'll clip it. And I'll pay attention to my value. Bringing my lights down, but also lifting my blacks. You can see the black levels in here aren't as deep as they are in our reference that we brought in. We're trying to match the black levels to what's in the plate right now. So I'm going to lift it up, but the mids are getting a little too bright, so maybe bring the mids down. You know, somewhere in there, we're starting to feel good. Of course, the color is all crazy, so I'm going to throw color balance on there. Put it on color mode. I'm going to add a little more cyan and blue, and we're going to color correct this. May take a little bit of finessing. We may need a hue and saturation in there if the saturation is too much. I'll put that on color as well so it doesn't affect value. And I'll pull out the saturation maybe before the color balance. Yeah, that's starting to help a little bit. Pull it out a little bit more. That's starting to sit in there a little bit. Maybe my lights are too bright. Knock that down. That's starting to help to sit in there now. And I can always go, and to help the edges fit a little bit better, I'm just going to grab my brush, and let's grab a soft brush here and just help with just that edge. If I just delete that edge and bring back a little bit of that ambient occlusion, it'll help the texture sit in a little bit better. So we may want to keep that top white edge that we had, the white frame, and I'm gonna just erase out a little bit, and then if I go too far, I'm gonna bring it back. Like that. And now I'll help to integrate that piece. And again, I'll look at my values to make sure everything is looking legit, and that looks pretty good. May need a little bit of color correct, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You guys get the point there. And then we'll do the same thing, grabbing the top of here. Maybe I want this pattern to come in there, so I'll grab this. And I'll do the same thing. I'll distort it and color correct it. So that's what we did to get this guy here. You can see the top has been replaced. And once we do replace the face, we obviously have to replace the reflection as well. And I'll show you guys how you could do that. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong layer stack here. Alright. So what we want to do is keep the trim the same, so you can see that the trim is reflected nicely. We don't need to change that. What we do need to change is add these white areas, because white's going to reflect. So I duplicate the texture and I flip it. So if we had this, flip vertical, or we can do move the pivot point down to the bottom, flip vertical so that it flips there, and then we just want to adjust the perspective there a little so it goes straight down, and so that we have exactly a nice edge-to-edge reflection. We can skew it into perspective there. And once that's there like that, we'll obviously flatten it out with the color corrector. We wouldn't do it the way I just did it. So it's reflected down. The color correct has been baked in at this point. And now we just want to simply erase it out. And we could use our passes. We can put it in here, paste it, and then hit blue, control select, come into our reflection here, and paint it out because we don't want it on our boats. Our boats or people. So there you go. And then once we're in there, let me just duplicate that mask in there. So we have a nice reflection. To get that nice kind of stretching feeling of the ripples, we can do motion blur here on the side just a little. I believe that's done on the mask. Slight little motion blur, and then what I like to do is grab my smudge tool, and you can do it simply by hand by following the same kind of smudging that's happening in the water. Or smudge it some more in some areas. You know, push it, pull it, depending on its strength. And then once you have it lowered down in opacity, you just get it something nice working in there. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just a little bit, and the brain will fill in the rest for you. So that's how you replace the texture in there. That's all that was. We did the same thing for this guy here. Exactly the same way, you know, brought it in, distorted it, color corrected it down. So same technique right there. This is where a lot of work was added here. Boat textures and people. And the way I usually do that is I just Google India River people, and you get something like this. And let's take a look, and this is what I do. I'll just grab this cool looking dude right here, his little stance, and you don't have to be too clean with this because it is going to be super small in the frame. So just doing a quick Roto. I'm going to copy them, paste them in our shot here, scale them down to our scale. Maybe you went down too much. Right about there. And throw on a clipping mask. Throw on my values here. And I'll start color correcting them. Slamming them down quite a bit. Darken him down into the scene. Maybe a little bit more. He looks a little too light still, considering he's a darker man. And then you'll see him be super red here, so we're gonna throw a hue and saturation on, desaturate him, and maybe even throw in a little bit of cyan to help him sit in the environment. And that's how people are put in here, and you can grab tons of people from here. Lady in color, which is great. You know, boys or girls, you know, in the boats traveling through. This guy sitting down, maybe this kid is selling something. So tons of little opportunities here to create stories and just copy and paste real life texture and realism into your work. And it's essentially how all of this stuff was put together, and then some boat textures, grabbing them and putting them over top just to get a little bit of difference and breakup in the boats so they don't look all the same. And that's all there is to the people. Alright, now the Palace main paint here that we talked about, adding some texture. And what I like to do is I like to bring in elements into my painting here. And they're just same exact elements, but keep them into my scene. If I ever need it, I could just quickly grab them rather than going back into the file. Maybe I closed it and I gotta find it again and open it. Just saves me time if I'm reusing it a lot. And all I did was bring it in, you know, distort it into perspective and color correct it just to clean that part up a little bit. And then here's a little addition that we didn't plan for up there, but I noticed that the tree kind of ended too conveniently behind this guy, and it didn't look too natural. I just wanted to extend it a little bit and play that light against the dark and then the dark against the light to create a little bit more separation, but also to make this feel a little bit more natural, and it looks a lot better to me. Alright, so once I have that, I'm just going to flatten this thing out because it's just taking way too much space now for no reason. And let's flip this guy over so we get a fresh look on it. Now that it's flattened out, the file size is a lot smaller. It'll be a little faster to convert to flip this canvas. And this is pretty much just going to give us a fresh look at the painting so that we can judge it a little bit more clearly than rather than looking at the same thing over and over and over again. Kind of look at it with fresh eyes. I'm not sure why this is taking so long. There we go, finally. Sorry, excuse my crappy machine. You can see that pixel is gone now. I don't know why it shows up like that. Alright, let's recrop this so we cut any excess texture or anything out. There we go, starting to feel really good. I like it. A lot of things help. Fresh eye on the canvas. And now I'm starting to look at the values, and this is where that color correct comes in. If I turn this on, you can see the difference. I just wanted a little bit darker foreground, darker foreground, and then a lighter background. Not lighter, but relative to what I darkened the front, is just naturally going to create that contrast. So what I did is use my Z-depth again to tell my color correct that I wanted to affect the foreground pieces and less of the background. And that's all it did. You can see that it's affecting here and a little bit of here and just leaving that foggy area there. And what it is just a slight curve down in the dark region so that we get a little bit more of a shift there. I didn't end up using that color balance, so I'll just delete it. And then I felt at this point that it was feeling a little too saturated, so I threw on a hue and saturation here on color mode so our values don't change, and just knocked it down just a little bit. Give it a little more natural feel than a colorful looking shot. And you see the color correct was done with everything underneath it, so it's affecting everything underneath. Everything else was balanced to each other. And now we get to reevaluate everything as a whole and see if there's anything else we can do to make this thing interesting. And we had the idea of adding more lights, so what I've done is create that focal area by using the same pass, but because we didn't have lights there specifically, what I did is just screened it on and then painted my mat in so that we have the natural light with the natural color that was affecting it, but just at a higher intensity so we get a little bit of a flow up there. So kind of reusing our passes for different multi-purpose use right there. And of course, if you have lights there, you're going to have reflections, and that reflection was just taking from our pass, you can grab this right here, copy and paste it. Oops, not from that layer. Copy and paste it and move it around. So I can bring this into here, screen it on, and we got insta reflection right there. Can move it around any kind of light source, and if I want, I can make it different. I can thin it out if I want to, if it's a smaller light source, and I can thicken it up if it's a little bigger light source and all that. So we can grab from our reflection pass right there as well, which is good. And that's all that is just duplicate it over. Not sure what this is doing here. A little bit of paint cleanup here and there, nothing too big. And what I did was I painted those lights in. Because I didn't have geometry and I wasn't going to go in for this tiny little thing to model it, I literally just grabbed a brush and painted this in. Nothing too crazy. And then I grabbed a light from here and I stretched it out to create that top part. Nothing too crazy there. And then we have, that's pretty much the entire painting right there. And we have our lights added here, but just a quick, I had an AO pass as well. And all I'm using it for is just a slight push down in some areas. Some areas near the boats there, creating a little bit of occlusion. In the water there from the texture. It just needed a little bit more integrating. And then here and there, near trees, not sure where else, but just anywhere where I feel like it might need a little bit more separation and integration. I didn't use it too heavily, as you can see. It was very hard. I use it in some corners to separate things out, but you can see it's mostly in these areas down here, as you can see from the where it's painted, just on the boats area. And here is that light pass that we've been waiting for. And it is duplicating the lights exactly the way we did, grabbing it from photographic texture, putting it in, and sometimes even painting some interactive lighting on stuff, and just placing it here and there to create some visual interest. And there's another thing happening in here, and that's that light bloom that we'll get to in a second. But you can see all the lights that are just going to add a little bit more life into this, create a little bit more visual interest, make it feel alive. Really, really helps. And it's just by taking a photograph, looking for reference of lights, grabbing it, bringing it over, screening it on, and just maybe adding a little bit of bloom. And once you have one, you can duplicate it around and just kind of shift the hue to create different colors if you wanted to, and different intensities. So that's what that's doing. And then there's also this little bit of bloom happening. So this is all the lights, and then this slight bloom is helping to integrate those edges of the CG into the sky. So I'm just taking a soft brush. If I take that off, I'm going to sample a value off of the sky again, and just take a soft brush and just do a few quick dabs just to lighten it just a little bit. And then if it's too much, I can always pull it down. But it just helps to integrate and help that sit in with that sky just a little bit. Sometimes CG just looks really cut out, and things like that, just that little bit of light bloom can help. And you can even throw a Z-depth in here as well, so it affects separately, but it's so subtle that it's not going to affect too much. And that's all that it is there. Just helps those edges not feel as harsh and CG. Helps with a little bit of light bloom. Keep it really subtle though. And then adding a little bit more of a light bloom, see if we like it. Create some separation, but you know, I can live with or without it. That's just painting. Painting a little warm color here, and painting where I want it, and then feeding it through the Z-depth so it doesn't affect the foreground. It's behind the foreground and affecting the background there, and then again matting out exactly where I don't want it. It adds a little bit, plays against that warm versus cool, so I'll keep it there. Could always remove it, it's on a separate layer. But that is all there is to it. That's the entire painting right there. So let's jump into our final thoughts here real quick. So you saw all the different passes that we used. You could see that the geo wasn't too complicated. It was sloppy at times, but we knew what we were modeling for, and we knew the distance that it was going to be at. We knew that we were going to do some painting on top of this, some cleanup and some touch-up. But what we used this 3D for more than anything was for the lighting and the atmosphere. The lighting is what's going to really make your stuff look real and believable. And having that just look accurate in the 3D really helps us sell your image. And we get all of this nice interactive light with the trees in there, and even the street lights, reflections we get for free. Those are the things that we really want out of CG. That's the reason we're doing it in CG or 3D. Everything else, when we render layers out in Photoshop, is to help us achieve that high quality image by using the core elements of image creation, things like form, color, light, atmosphere, composition, lighting, contrast, edges. Those are the things that we have in our head that work. Those are our weapons to create a great looking image. And the render layers are kind of like a tool to help us to get there. Our IDs are going to help us to paint down contrast or paint up contrast. Our reflections are going to help with the realism and the lighting. And we're always checking our values. I can't stress how important values are. I like to do value studies all the time. That's the fundamentals, the foundation of your painting. So make sure you pay attention to your values quite a lot. This is a 3D map painting, but you saw a lot of the techniques, not the techniques, but the thinking process that is being used relies heavily on 2D art principles, the stuff that you learn in school and in art school. And the 3D is just a tool to get the job done. It's to make it easier for yourself as far as lighting, but the real the meat and potatoes of the image comes from those core elements of image creation that we mentioned. So always pay attention to that. Always check your values. See where you can really create interest by maybe playing up your contrast with your edges or knocking them down, and seeing where your image will really benefit from pushing and pulling to get some nice silhouettes, some nice form, and some nice atmosphere and value. Alright, I thank you for purchasing this tutorial. I thank you for patience, for waiting for it to come out, and can't wait to see all of your guys' stuff online. Thanks again.